Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Data Everywhere, but what does it all mean? A briefing on the New York State Arts Education Data Project with Dr. Bob Morrison. It's lovely to see you all again in this virtual space. My name is Lauren Wagner. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman in her 30s, and I'm sitting here in my home office in Patchogue, New York. I am the Executive Director of Long Island Arts Alliance, an alliance of and for the region's not-for-profit arts and culture arts education organizations. Long Island Arts Alliance offers leadership and diverse support services to arts organizations, serves as an advocate for arts education in our schools, and collaborates on strategies for economic development and community revitalization. I want to welcome you all to the very first program of our newly founded grassroots arts education advocacy group, the Long Island Arts Education Coalition. This is very exciting for us because for many years now, our founder and our representative on the Board of Regents, the Honorable Roger Tillis, has been discussing ways we can address the growing concerns pertaining to arts education on Long Island and in New York State. At this crucial time when our representatives are setting educational policy with long-term implications, we have decided to act and form a network of arts administrators, arts educators, college and university leaders, and state agency representatives to guarantee that children will continue to enjoy the peace and the fulfillment that arts can bring to their lives. It is our goal through the coalition to work to develop systems and infrastructure that expand and sustain accessible arts education for all students of all ages within all 125 public school districts on Long Island. We will focus on building and strengthening partnerships and collaborations between schools and arts and culture programs led by arts organizations and local artists. But where do we start? How do we identify need from more than just an anecdotal perspective? Data. We know that convincing local government and civic leaders to take action takes more than an enthusiastic appeal to individual morals. It takes numbers, it takes data, it takes statistics, and that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. I do want to point out that the session will be recorded and it will be made available on Long Island Arts Alliance's website and our YouTube channel. I will send the link to all registrants after the webinar closes, probably later this week. We will save some time at the end for a Q&A, so please put any questions you have for Bob in the Q&A feature. If you see something that's similar to what you want to ask, just upvote it so that way we don't get a million of the same questions. And that's all from me. It's my pleasure to introduce our facilitator today, Dr. Bob Morrison. Bob has a long history as a supporter of music education and is widely recognized as one of nation's leading advocates for music and arts in education and in society. He is the founder of Quadrant Arts Education Research, the nation's leading arts education research and intelligence organization. Dr. Morrison's leadership in research, public policy, and advocacy efforts has led to significant advancements in access to music and arts education programs across the nation. So Bob, we are so excited to have you with us today, and please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Morrison, and I am the project director for the Arts Education Data Project and CEO of Quadrant Research. And it's great to be with all of you in New York, and I see some familiar faces not from New York that are joining us today as well. Let's start talking about this thing we call arts education data. And a lot of times people ask me, how did we get into this? How did you ever decide that this was, a pathway to go into as part of a career? And so I'll begin with the origin story. The origin story starts when back in 1988, I was a senior executive with a company called Pearl. Pearl is a large musical instrument manufacturer in the percussion business. And we were getting ready to get into the education market. And so our executives tasked me with doing the research to identify what's the size of the market, what's the market opportunity for our business. And so as part of that process, I started to ask some questions. And the first question that I asked was this: how many schools have music programs? And it was interesting because I would talk to a number of different people, and when we went to the various sources, nobody had any idea how many schools had instrumental music programs. We went to the U.S. Department of Education,
They had no idea. We went to the Music Educators National Conference, which was the precursor to what we know today as the National Association for Music Education. Figured they would know because they're the organization in charge of music education in the United States. They didn't have any idea at all. We went to the trade association. The trade association, surely you must have information on music education in the United States. They didn't know. And no matter where we turned to, and no matter who we talked to, this information just wasn't there, which was really kind of disconcerting as a business person at the time, because the way that we measure our businesses is based on these ideas of profit, loss, and market share. And the strange thing was that we didn't have such a beast as it related to music education, arts education in the United States. We had no idea what the status and condition of arts education was. And there were some really, really important questions that went unanswered. Questions like, how many students have access to arts education programs? How many schools are providing that access to instruction? How many teachers do we have that are providing instruction in arts education? And in which arts disciplines are the offerings available? Dance, media arts, music, theater, visual art. What courses are available within those disciplines? Who has access? Who does not? And most importantly, how does any of this change over time? And this led to us really reflecting on what can we do to try to find this information out. And unfortunately, it took another 20 years for us to begin to get an idea on how to get access to this particular information. And it started when we were working on a report. A friend of mine and this was in 2004. A friend of mine worked at the Department of Education in the state of California. He had access to their data systems and mentioned to me that he had been poking around a little bit. So I asked him if I might have access to the data and the information. And he said, sure. And he gave me a data file that we were able to analyze. And that led to the release of this report. The report's called The Sound of Silence, The Unprecedented Decline of Music Education in California Public Schools, a Statistical Review. And what we found at the time was that between 1999 and 2004, there was a 50% decline in music participation in the state of California. 50% decline. That's huge. And it was so startling when we saw the numbers that we released the report right away. We didn't even spend time trying to figure out why, because the trend was so dire that we felt that we needed to, raise the alarm bells. And so we did in California. That report came out, and that led then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger to set up $1 billion investment into restoring music and arts education programs in California's public schools. So that's back in 2005. And so we pretty quickly realized that if we had good data and can make a case, it could drive decision makers, policymakers to make changes. And in this instance, we did a study that cost, less than $1,000 and ended up generating over $1 billion investments into California arts education programs. So that let us know that we were definitely on to something at the time. And as a result, we started to then do studies in other communities. So we released a whole series of reports for different states that we were working with, including, New Jersey and Oklahoma and Ohio and Michigan and several others. We probably did 15 reports that were like this. And it certainly showed us that we were on to something. But at the same time, these type of reports were pretty labor intensive because we were actually going out and surveying the individual schools. And I knew that that was not sustainable. So we started to talk to the states and begin to lay out ideas on how might we get a systemic way to gather arts education data across the country. And in order to do that, some conditions had to change. And the first condition that had to change was the creation of the America Competes Act in 2007, which was then reauthorized in 2011. And the America Competes Act basically calls for the structures or underpinnings to longitudinal data gathering in education writ large. And so the first item was that it required the establishment of a unique statewide student identifier that does not permit a student to be individually identified by users of the system. So they wanted to have basically a what we call a de-identified way to look at the information on individual students. So that was the first thing that had to come into play. The second thing was that this system would track students based on their enrollment, their demographic information, and their program participation based on various courses that they would sign up for. And in addition to that, the data would track the student information at the points in which they exit, transfer in, transfer out, drop out, or complete their P16 education programs. And P16 basically means pre-K through completion of college. And so the America Competes Act really laid the foundation on which all of the state longitudinal data systems today have been built. So that was the first thing that had to happen. And the second condition was there had to be an agreement as to what data would be gathered. Now, we talked about students and student information, and we talked about the fact that they were going to gather data on courses, but which courses and who was going to define it? And so that led us to get engaged with the Chief State School Officers Association, and we did a presentation back in 2009 to their data management group, where they came out with a series of recommendations. And we were presenting on behalf of the non-tested subjects to make the case that that the data should be gathered on all courses as defined by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And what you'll see here is in point 2 is that's exactly what they do. That all data collection on school courses, teachers, and number of students enrolled should include all core academic subjects as defined by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So that was critical. So the fact that the arts were codified as a core subject through ESEA back in 2009, that set the stage for them to be included in these longitudinal data systems. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing that needed to happen was we had to have a unified set of course codes so that everyone had a similar understanding that fourth grade band in New York would equal the same thing as fourth grade band in Texas or California or Montana. So having a set of common course codes that states could use to align their systems to was important. And so working with our friends at the State Education Agency's Directors of Arts Education, or CDA, which is basically David Siegelman, who's at the New York Department of Education, and his counterparts from across the country are part of that organization. We work together to revise what they're calling the SCED codes, right? School courses for the exchange of data that were developed by the National Center for Education Statistics. So we worked on both what they call the secondary course codes and then the prior to secondary course codes to make sure that they were in alignment and were following modern practice regarding how arts courses were being provisioned in the United States at the time. So these steps laid the foundation for the data ultimately to begin to be gathered by the individual states. And what it showed us was we now know that the information exists, but what we also found out was that the states lacked the funding or the capacity to actually leverage the data. In the United States, and I think the same is true in the state of New York, probably 90% of the data that our departments of education are gathering go unused. they never see the light of day. There's no opportunity to tease out the insight or the knowledge that may be gained in that data, which is why we came up with developing the system, because we knew that states didn't have the capacity, but they had the data. So if we could get access to the data, then we could unlock the knowledge that existed in that information and share it with everybody else. And that's what led to the creation of the Arts Education Data Project, and what we're going to talk about today. So the Arts Education Data Project is a collaborative partnership between the state education agencies, directors of arts education, and Quadrant Research. And we are supported by the generosity of several organizations and foundations, including the CMA Foundation, which is the Country Music Association, the Music Man Foundation, which is the estate of Meredith Willson, where all of the royalties and revenues generated from all of Meredith Willson's musical creations go into that foundation, and they've become a significant supporter of music and arts education across the country. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation of Hewlett-Packard fame, the NAM Foundation, and our first state that was supporting us was the Ohio Arts Council, with a grant to support the expansion of this project. And what's important to understand about the project is this is based on working with existing data that we acquire from the individual states. So we're not out there doing new surveying or new data gathering. We are just working with the states to gain access to the data that they're already collecting. So we're working with existing data and existing data sets. It's been developed over the past 20 years, working with various state and federal agencies. We are currently operating in 31 states, representing about 65% of the student population, with another 8 states in development that we hope to have in place by the end of 2023. And at that point in time, we'll be covering about 87% of the student population in the United States with this particular system. But what's important to understand is that the data is not the end. The data is a means to an end. And that end that we're going for is increased access and participation in arts education for all students across the country. That's the goal. The data is a means to an end, and that end is increasing access to and participation in arts education across this country. So this is a map of the states that we're working with. The green states are all the states that we have agreements with, that we've either released data or we're currently working on their data. The light blue states are states that we're in negotiations with. The light gray states are states that we have not made any contact with yet. And then the dark gray states, those 3 states of Colorado, Michigan, and Maine, they actually don't have any data, so they will not be able to participate in the project. They're in the process of standing up their data systems, but they don't have them stood up quite yet. But for today, what we're going to talk about is New York. And so we're going to talk about New York State and the Arts Education Data Project for the state of New York. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start by going to the dashboards, and we're going to start with the dashboards for New York State. And the first place that we're starting is with this table of contents. So the table of contents is what we call the landing page. This actually is a navigation source that allows you to jump from this page to any of the dashboards that we have up there, but it also gives you a quick overview of the wide variety of dashboards that are there. And that includes things like, we have an instructions dashboard, we have an overview dashboard, a dashboard that covers county level arts education, district level arts education. We have a dashboard that looks just at disciplines. We have a dashboard that looks at the data over time or trends over time. We have a dashboard that allows you to find courses and determine what schools are offering what courses. We allow you to explore what schools are offering which disciplines and identify them to support your work. We have the comparisons dashboard where you can actually compare a school or a district with other schools or districts. Then we have a school profile, and then we have the item that we call no arts. So for the purposes of our conversation today, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the overview page. And the overview page, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on just breaking down the structure of everything. Then we'll quickly touch on some of the other dashboards, just to give you an idea on how to utilize it before we get to our question and answers. So for the overview, we're going to wake up our system here because it's been sleeping for a bit. We're going to start with the state level overview. And this is where we want people to start because this gives you an overview of what's happening in the state. So right off the bat, up in the upper left-hand corner, that's where we put, start with our key performance indicators. And those that we look at are what's the percentage of students that are enrolled in the state. So here we see that 80.5% of students in New York State are actually enrolled in an arts education program. And by the way, as a point of comparison, that's a great number. We only have a handful of states that are at or near 80%. So that's a great number to have. But then we also look at, well, what's the percentage of students that don't have access? And that's 4.3%. Then coming across the top, we look at the number of schools, 4,700 plus schools, the number of students in the state, 2.6 million, the number of art students, 2 million art students in the state, and then the number of students that don't have access to any arts instruction. And in New York, that's 112,000 students, and we'll get back to that in a second. Then we try to highlight in the bar charts the students and schools that are providing access to arts education, as well as those that are meeting the state requirements of providing 4 arts disciplines to those schools. So you can see that 96% of the states, 96% of the students have access to arts education programs. 94% of schools are providing that access, yet only 15% of students and only 10% of schools are actually providing the state required arts education programs based on state policy. Then we look at enrollment by free and reduced lunch. So we look at low free and reduced lunch all the way to schools that have a high percentage of students on free and reduced lunch. And you can see how while low and mid-low and mid-high are all in the same range, there's a little bit of a disconnect when we get to the high free and reduced lunch, where that has lower participation rates. Then when we look at enrollment by grade level, this is when we're looking at it based on the type of school. So is it an elementary school or middle school or a high school, or what we're referring to as mixed? Those are schools that are K-8, K-12, 7-12s, schools that don't fit neatly into the other bins. So you can see how the participation rates, decline as students move through the system from elementary to middle to high. So there we're looking at the unique number of students that are involved in the arts. The next level down, we're looking at the discipline level participation. So here, when we're looking at music or visual art or theater, now we're looking at the unique number of students that are involved in a music course, or the unique number of students that are involved in visual art. And if you hover over, you will see actually the grade level enrollment for a particular discipline. So it's helpful to quickly take a look. Okay, what does it look like when I look at music making in the elementary school compared to the high school level? And the same is true as you go across any of the other disciplines. You'll see how the grade level information presents itself. And then the lowest level of grain size of the data is at the course level. And that's down here at the bottom. And here you see all the courses for each of the disciplines. And we even give you a course count so you can see the number of courses within each discipline. And then obviously, the higher the number, the more students are involved. And so your highest numbers are going to tend to be your general music, general visual art courses at the elementary level, where we see that 1.2 million students are involved in those programs. And then some of your other ones, you'll start to see the numbers are slightly less when we begin to filter over them, whether it's printmaking, or if we come over here, it's music grade 6 or chorus. So it gives you a way to look at student enrollment, but you can also toggle this drop down over here and switch it to look at the count of schools that are offering a discipline. or a course. And now it gives you a clearer picture of what are the most popular courses within the individual disciplines as it relates to school offerings. So that's an important thing to understand about the breakdown of the grain size of unique arts students, unique students by discipline, and then unique students at the individual course level. And the reason why we do that is so that we can get accurate information at any of the three levels, so that we aren't double counting a student, say, that's in band and chorus. We don't want to count them two times when we look at the number of students that are in music. So we only count a student that's in two music courses once at the unique discipline level, and we only count a student that may be involved in music and visual art once at the unique arts level. So unique arts, unique discipline, unique course level. That's the way that the information is structured throughout these dashboards. So a couple of tricks that I'll show you here that you can do is you can filter by clicking on the grade span, and now all of a sudden the view is going to refresh and is just giving us the information for elementary school students. So now we're looking at elementary arts education across the entire state, and I can go further and say I want to look at elementary arts education for students that are in high free and reduced lunch areas, and that now recreates the visualization to show us just that information. So we have the ability to just quickly filter the information based on these attributes. And if you're ever on a dashboard and you're not quite sure how to interact with it, all of them have these little help buttons. And if you click on the help button, an overlay will pop up, and that overlay will show you all the information on what everything means on a particular dashboard, like how to move between dashboards, or what's underneath the question mark, which usually is more information, or how do I filter, or what happens if I hover. So all of the help information is available on each of the dashboards so that you could acquaint yourself with the functionality. The last thing that I want to touch on here is that there's a filter up at the top. And here is where you can filter down to a county or a district, or look at things by traditional charter or by locale code type. Locale code is basically, that's just telling us, is it a city large, or is it a suburb, town, or rural communities? So it's basically a geographic way to look at the information. But another thing that we have is we actually have some teacher metrics that we actually hide initially so as not to confuse things when you come in. And this will show you the number of arts teachers in the state. So there's 30,000 arts teachers in the state of New York, the number of the student to all students to arts teacher ratio, and then the arts students to arts teacher ratio overall for the state. So again, ways to get at additional information. But if we wanted to, we could come in here and just say, I want to look at Nassau County. So we come in here, change this filter to Nassau County, and now the entire dashboard that we're looking at, this is Nassau County arts education programs. And you can see the participation rate at 83.3%. That's higher than the 80.5. So we can see that that's stronger in the state. And then once you're here in Nassau County, then you can use the filters. So now I'm going to look at just elementary schools, or I just want to look at schools that are low, free, and reduced lunch. So again, these are ways to interact with this information. But one thing that I want to share with you, I want you to pay particular attention to this number. So we're saying there are 112,000 students in the state that don't have access to arts education programs. So I wonder what happens when we look at just charter schools. So when I click on the charter schools for the entire state, we see that 83,000 students of the 112,000 students, or nearly 3/4 of the students that don't have access to arts education in the state of New York, are in charter schools. That's amazing that there's that level of students that do not have access to arts education in charter schools in the state of New York. So I'm not going to comment any further on that, but it's certainly one of those data points that makes you go, I wonder why that is. So you can come in here, filter by charter, or you can clear that out, and we can just look at all of the data. And if you come to a county, if I wanted to, I could then come down to, again, we were in Nassau County, and I think I'm going to pick on my friend Chad Wyman, who is the arts supervisor for the folks over in Hicksville. So we'll go to Hicksville Union, and now the dashboard is giving me the information for the Hicksville Union School District. Right? So 88.8% of the students in that district are participating in arts education programs in some way, shape, or form. So that's how you can use this dashboard. Even though it gives you an overview, you can really quickly get to county or even down to district level to get to some of that information. So what I'm going to do is just clear out these selections and walk you through some of the other dashboards. So the next dashboard that we're going to take a look at is a county level dashboard. And this allows you to compare the information for individual counties. And when we look at the information, you can either highlight a county by coming in here and typing the name, or just clicking it on the map. So if I wanted to just look at, well, what's happening in Nassau County, I can highlight Nassau County, and it will show me where Nassau County fits with all the other counties as it relates to a particular metric. Here we're looking at the enrollment rate. And then down below, it's listing all the counties, and it's giving you the top counties and then the lowest counties in the state for arts enrollment. But I can change that to look at it to, schools offering required arts. And now it shows that Nassau County actually is in a higher level for students that or schools that are offering the required arts disciplines. So you can change this metric and say, I want to look at students without access and see where the county falls. And so obviously there wasn't that issue in Nassau County, so that's not there. But we could then come over here and click on Suffolk County, and now it's going to show me how Suffolk County compares. And then if I go back to enrollment rates, it will then give me the information there. And again, you'll see that Nassau County is not in the top or the bottom. They tend to be kind of in the middle for the arts participation level. So it's one way to interact with the dashboard, and you can look at individual attributes, at the county level. At the district level, this one's really good because of the fact that it now breaks things down where you're looking at not only the district level, but schools within the district level. And we're also keeping in place kind of the state level line. So we can see here that enrollment in the state really from 2018 to 2019 to 2020 was actually pretty consistent. And so then what we can do is look at a particular district, and that district then compare that district to other parts of the state. So if I wanted to, I could come up here and pick the district name. And so again, I'm just going to keep picking on Chad. So we'll go to Hicksville. And once we go to Hicksville, then the information will refresh itself, and then it'll compare Hicksville to the state averages. So here we see that Hicksville Union, we can see the state level is in gray and Hicksville's is in red. So remember we said it was 88.5 or 89%. So you can see they're higher than the state average, but then we can also see how the schools compare to the state average based on their particular makeup, whether it's based on free and reduced lunch. So we can see that their low free and reduced lunch is higher than what the average is. We can see that their mid-low is higher than what the average is. And we can also see that they have one school where the majority of students are Hispanic, and that school significantly outperforms all the other schools in the state that are majority Hispanic. So it gives you a frame of reference for the information that you're looking at, on the dashboard. And you can also change the year. So you can actually go back and say, well, I want to look at 2019 instead of 2020. by just clicking on the year in the filter button, it will then refresh the information and make it available to you that way. So that's what the district level, how that works. But I want to point out a couple of the other information on here. Down below, we've got the information for each of the individual disciplines. So we can see the number of schools that are offering music, the number of students, the number of courses, and the number of teachers they have in the district, as well as what their participation rate is in the discipline by year. So you can see if there's any changes. And then the same is true for theater or dance or other, which in many states tends to be media arts. So that's how you can take a look at the information and how trends may have been changing over time using the district level dashboard. The next one I'm going to touch on is arts disciplines, right? So someone may come in and go, well, I'm not really interested in looking at all arts. I'm just interested in looking at dance, or I'm interested in looking at music. So here you can come and just toggle any of these buttons across the top to look at a particular discipline. So right now we're looking at music. It's telling us the number of schools that are offering it, the number of students, the number of teachers, the arts teacher ratio. And if you remember, when we looked earlier, that music participation in the state was at 61%. And then we have this number here that we call the uptake rate up in this upper right-hand corner here. The uptake rate is measuring participation in schools that are offering. So the 61% that's published, that's just the participation for all schools, whether they have music programs or not. The uptake rate just looks at the schools that are offering music to get a real look at what's the actual participation when the opportunity is provided to students. And I think that's important to understand, because when we look at something like dance, we know that in New York State, 10% of students participate in dance, but in schools where dance is offered, 49% of students are actually participating. That's a huge number. And I think it highlights the fact that dance is not a content area where there's a lack of interest. Dance is a content area where there's a lack of opportunity. If the opportunity is provided, as we see here, we know that students will actually enroll in those dance courses. So that's some of the information that you can glean from this. And now we actually introduce for the first time courses. So you can actually see, well, what does the course enrollment look like? What are the courses that are offered? And what does enrollment look like for that discipline? We then break it down by grade level, we break it down by gender, and we break it down by free and reduced lunch. What's interesting is here for dance, look at how it increases as free and reduced lunch increases. So that the highest levels of participation in dance are actually in schools that have the highest level of students receiving free and reduced lunch. For some, that may be counterintuitive, but it is, something that the data is revealing to us at this point in time. So you can click on this to look at theater, and it will refresh, or you can go to visual art and it will refresh. And so that's ways that you can begin interacting with this information at the discipline level. And of course, we've got our handy dandy filters. So if you wanted to go down to a district level or a county level or compare charter schools, you have the ability to do that again from the filter. And also, if you're not sure how to navigate or use the particular dashboard, we've got the handy dandy help button up there that will help explain some of that information to you. The last couple ones, and then I'll stop so we can take some questions. This is our trends over time dashboard. And this actually is what gives you a view of how is the data changing year over year, or when we look at multiple years. So here for New York, we have data for 2018, 19, and 2020. And so the data that's here begins to show us what's happened over time. And we can see that while the number of students have decreased and that the percentage of arts students has remained pretty flat, that the arts enrollment rate actually increased because of the contracting student population in the state as a whole. We also can see that there's been an increase to the access of required arts disciplines. There's been a decrease in the number of students that don't have access to the arts, a decrease in the number of schools that are not providing any arts instruction. and a slight increase in the percentage of teachers that are involved. And these lines underneath, if you hover, will actually show you the individual year-over-year information. The chart shows you the map, and you can change the map based on, right now we're looking at arts enrollment, but if you wanted to just look at arts students, you can click on that and it would change the number to look at just the arts student rate. Here we're looking at free and reduced lunch category based on participation. So you can see how do the individual categories move in relationship to one another. And then the same thing is true with arts enrollment by school, majority, race, ethnicity. Here you can see that schools where there was other majority, race, ethnicity is actually become higher in participation than schools that are majority white. But one thing I want to point out is schools that are majority Black have significantly lower participation rates than schools that are majority Hispanic, no majority, other, or white. Because you see them all clustered up here at the top, yet down at the bottom, where the schools where the majority of students of Black are, they're significantly off. In some instances, as much as 20 percentage points. So that would be one of those things that you'd want to dig into more, because that clearly is an equity issue in the state. And then down at the bottom, more discipline information. And if you hover over the discipline, it will give you, it will show you the changes, the courses that have the highest increase or the highest decrease across each of the discipline areas. Then the other thing that you can do is actually look at that information and see how that transpires by district, and then even by school. So right now, if I come into this area, I can go to, right now we're looking at district. If I can filter this down to, say, Nassau County, then within Nassau County, I can look at an individual district. And then within the individual districts, we can actually look at schools. So right now, I'm just going to filter this down to Nassau County. It's now giving me schools in Nassau County. I'm going to go to Hicksville. And when I go to Hicksville, it's now giving me the individual schools. And now I can see what's the 3-year trend change in participation for each of the disciplines by school. So again, trends over time, lots of information, lots of ways to interact with the information to get you to that information. So let me clear out that filter. And a couple other things that I'll just touch on. One is our course finder. So here, if I wanted to know the number of schools that are offering AP Music Theory, I would just come in here, check the box for AP Music Theory, and it gives me a map showing me all the location of all the schools that are offering AP Music Theory. Or if I wanted to change that and I wanted to make it, I want to see all the schools that are offering dance rep, I would apply that here. And now it's showing me the list of schools and the location of the schools that are offering dance repertory as a course. Disciplines offered is a fun little area to work with the data, because here you'll see that within each of the disciplines, you have the choice to say, I want to see if the school's offering music, is not offering music, or is or is not offering music, which is either. So here, we're showing you the listing of all the schools, but I can come in here and pick on, show me the schools that are not offering music. And by doing that, now I've got a list and a map of all the schools that are not offering music. And if I go the other way, I could say, show me the schools that are not offering visual art, and it will then give me that information as well. So then you can do any combination. You can say, I want only schools that are not offering visual art, that are not offering theater, but are offering dance. And it will then give me the list of schools that meet that particular criteria. Up at the top, I want to highlight for you is this graph that shows you the schools, the percentage of schools based on the number of disciplines that they're offering. So 6% of schools do not offer anything, 8% of schools offer one, 59% of schools are offering 2 disciplines, 15% offering 3, and 13% offering 4 or more. That's just to give you a sense of the the diversity of course offerings or discipline offerings within the individual schools. So we also talked about the fact there's a comparisons chart. You can come in here and actually select individual schools by using this filter to search by criteria. So whether I want to look at high schools that are very small, that are high free and reduced lunch, and if I apply these filters, then it will then give me a selection of schools that meet that criteria. And then based on those schools or based on those individual districts, I can then select a district, and based on the information from that district, I can then go and select another district and compare those two districts together to see how they compare to one another based on a lot of these attributes that we have here. Then we have a school profile, which is one of my favorites because data is the most impactful the closer it is to the user. So state level information may be of interest, but what most parents are interested in is what's happening in my school. What's the data that's impacting me directly? So we have school profile. You can use the filter to make your selection. You can select the county, the district name, the school name, the year of the data that you want. And then it will show you the percentage of participation by each of the disciplines. It will show you the number of teachers in each of the disciplines. It will show you the enrollment by grade level in each of the disciplines for the year. So this is a snapshot of what's happening today. Then down below, it will show you longitudinally, well, how has the enrollment changed for the school in each of the disciplines over the 3 years? How have course offerings changed? And it then will show us how the enrollment trends have gone for the district in arts education, as well as the overall enrollment. And then lastly, what you can do is down at the bottom, you hit the menu item, and it will now show you the actual course offerings at the school and the enrollment in those course offerings by year. And if we're in a situation where there's a small number of students, we mask any data for students less than 10, because that's the state requirement for making sure we protect student privacy by not making visible small cell sizes of the data. So this one's one of my favorites, and I think a lot of community members will actually use that. And it's designed in such a way that someone can just print this out and walk in to a meeting with it. Lastly, that I'm going to hit on is that we've got the listing of schools that do not offer arts instruction. So when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, where are the schools that don't have arts instruction? Here's the information for the state. We show you down below this, we're laying out for you the distribution of all students and comparing it to the distribution of students that don't have access. And you can see schools where the majority of students are Black or schools where the majority of students are Hispanic are overrepresented with no art students. So again, highlighting that equity issue. And more importantly, like we talked about before, 56% of charter schools are not offering arts instruction. 56% of charter schools in the state. I mean, to me, that's a staggering number. But again, something that raises the question, why is that? And that's where the work of advocates come into play. So here, if I come in and I select the county, I can actually do a multi-select. So I'm going to come in and hit Nassau County, and then I'm going to add to it Suffolk County, and I'm going to apply that. And now the information will show us the 9 schools in the 2 counties that do not have arts education offerings. And by the way, there's only 1 school in Suffolk County. So that's how you can use this to kind of target some of your efforts, some of your advocacy efforts in areas where additional support may be needed for those students. Last couple things just to show you. Again, I mentioned the Arts Education Data Project, the website at artseddata.org. Also on the website, we have a national report on the status of arts education, and I would encourage you to go in there. One of the highlights of it that I'll share is that 96% of all students in the United States have access to arts education programs in their public schools. 65% of all students in the United States participate in arts education programs. And every day in the United States, 25 million students go to school and make music, and 25 million students go to school and create art. So we're not talking about a situation where our programs are disappearing or we barely exist or some of the other negative narratives that have been out there. The data blows holes through all of those arguments that have been made and clearly shows that the vast majority of students have access to these programs. The vast majority of students are participating in these programs. That said, we still have millions of students that do attend school every day that don't have access to these programs. Additionally, you'll find on the website a link to the report, and you can download that report. And actually in the chat, once I'm done here, I'm actually going to drop a summary report that we did for the state of New York so that you can interact with that. And so I see where we are on time. I'm going to stop there and we can do a little bit of Q&A. So with that, I'll turn off my presentation, ask Lauren to come back in here, and we can spend some time taking your questions.
Okay, so let's go for the first question here. So who in the school reports the data, and what if there's no art staff? For example, most schools in this region of New York do not have theater teachers or classes, so how do they know how many students are involved?
So the way that it's reported is every school district has somebody designated to report their data to the state. So it is that designated individual that will do the reporting either from the school or from the district to the state of New York. And I want to emphasize that this is the same data reporting system that is used to report all education data to the state. That includes assessment scores, that includes student information, student background information. So this is not something that's separate and apart from the main data gathering system. This is part of the state's data gathering system, and every district has somebody that's assigned to monitor and supply that information. And they gather that information based on course enrollment. So they go to the course rolls to see who's involved in those programs. And then based on that, usually an individual teacher is assigned to a course code that the students are actually enrolled in. So that's how we get the teacher information, by connecting the teacher ID to the course ID that the student is enrolled in. All that information is reported to the state. We just take that data, reassemble it, and then push it back out in usable information. Now, that said, that's not to say that the data is perfect. You know, we want you to go in and kick the tires, and you're going to go, wait a second, that's not right. I know that in our school, you know, we have a theater teacher, and this is saying that we don't have a theater teacher. Well, the answer then is to talk to the data person in your district to find out why the data is not being reported properly. Usually it's a coding error. Sometimes you have somebody that, you know, takes a shortcut and just puts it into an arts other category, so that it's kind of been miscategorized for the reporting purposes. And all you need to do is just, you know, highlight it, talk to the data person, make sure they correct it moving forward. For the counties, you know, this is an opportunity to do professional development for your visual and performing arts coordinators, to educate them so that they can go through their district data, and then they can then know to talk to the data people in their district to make sure that the data is aligned. I would say that with this data that we have, that we're probably, you know, 90% of the way there. But it'll take another year or two to get those numbers up as people begin to kick the tires on the data and work in correcting any information that is not correct on the system as it exists now.
And thank you. And that flows kind of into this question. So when does new data, like from 2021 on become available, and how often is the data updated?
So we're now on we're on an annual updating process. Every state's a little bit different. We update it based on the state's timeline. So as soon as New York has 2021 data and 2021 data available and 2022 data available, we will take that information and update it. We should be getting 2021 data pretty quickly because I think that data is already ready. We may be waiting a few more months to get the final data sets for 2022. I know how important that data is because that will show us the impact of COVID and how COVID has impacted, our communities. But I can tell you from what I've seen in other states, 2021, you're going to see a dip. There'll be a slight decline in 2021, and then you'll see the rebound in 2022, and even a bigger rebound in 2023 based on data that we're seeing now.
We have a question from Gully Stanford.
Hey, Gully.
Many career technical institutes like BOCES and the Big Five high schools offer art-centric CTE courses. Assuming these aren't included in this study, what needs to be done to include those data?
So that's really a coding and reporting issue. So it's really dependent on how the state itself is recognizing those courses. Some states will include those in their arts education reporting as arts courses. In some states, they won't. They'll just be CTE courses. And so I think it's just a matter. It depends on how New York is handling those courses and how they're reporting those courses, and whether they would end up showing up. Most of the time, those CTE courses will show up under media arts or other. But I think that that's certainly something we need to check with David on at the State Department to see how those courses are being handled and whether or not they're recognized as part of traditional arts education course offerings or not, or just exclusively in the CTE world.
Are these programs only offered by the school staff, or are all types of arts provided, like artist residencies, etc.? I think this is kind of talking about, local arts organizations who have programs. Does this data touch on any of that information, or is this only school-led programs?
So this is only school-based programs that are for credit and grade. Because again, this is being reported by their data system. So students enroll in a course, that data is gathered, that data is then reported, and is required to be reported to the state. There is no such requirement for engagement with cultural organizations, and so that information is not information that we gather because again, we don't do our own surveying. We rely on the state to provide the data. And unfortunately, there's not a state in the country that gathers data on cultural organizations and how they interact. But I think it might be an opportunity, for the coalition in your work in Long Island to maybe do some additional data gathering to be able to tell that particular part of the story. Because this is by no means meant to not value the important role that cultural organizations play. It's just the data is not available and it's not scalable. So that's why I would encourage maybe developing some plans around the two counties on Long Island on how you might be able to gather and report that information in a way that would be complementary to the information that we're making available in the data project.
And we are actually working on something like that. There's another program out there that I believe you've worked with before, that will gather that information from all of the arts organizations and who they've actually worked with in schools, and connective tissue between the arts organizations and our public school districts. So it needs funding, so we're hoping to raise the funds for that, but it is something that we are working on. Lauren had a question about downloading. Are you able to download spreadsheets from the data dashboard? No. Okay.
No, we have data sharing agreements, and we are under strict confidentiality agreements. So we cannot share that data. We are prohibited from sharing the data. However, you can create a visualization by using the filters on a particular dashboard, and you can then download a PDF of that dashboard. So, or of what you create. So there is a way to download PDF files of visualizations that you create, but we can't release the underlying data because of the privacy restrictions and making sure that we're protecting student privacy.
Okay, I'm dropping the link to the dashboard in the chat again. There's a couple people asking for it, and I will send.
And by the way, I just dropped in a copy of the PDF report that we did. That basically is a summary report. So it's a PDF file that's in the chat. I just stuck it in there.
Great. And Barbara asks, how does the comparison feature work?
So the comparison feature is basically you're able to look at all the list of districts and either select it by running through the list, or you can use the filter to filter by attributes. So what I did is I looked at high schools that were small, that were high free and reduced lunch, and that then filtered down the universe of schools just to schools that met that criteria. And then from there, I then went to compare the individual districts with one another. There's also a way to change the view from comparing districts to one another to comparing schools to one another. And again, the help overlay is there to help you navigate through that in case that's not in case it's not intuitive enough for you there.
Okay, I think that might be it. Yeah,
oh, you know what? So I actually sent. I'm dropping in a couple links here. I actually sent the. I posted the file, but I posted it to the wrong chat. So I've now posted it to the right one. So everyone should be able to see that. I also dropped in a link to the national report, the PDF, as well as then I'll drop in a link to the national report interactive dashboards so that you can have access to that information.
Great, and I will save all of this and include it in the link that I send to all the registrants. What a really great question to end us on. Bob, where does your research go from here?
So by adding more states, we're getting to the place where we can now tell the national story. So it's really about getting more people to use the dashboards, using them to influence policy in their communities, and encouraging folks within your state to ask the hard questions. You know, why is it that there are discrepancies with students that are in schools that are majority Black or majority Hispanic versus schools that are not minority majority? Why is it that over half of the charter schools in the state of New York don't have arts education? These are questions that the data reveals that, you know, we're basically giving you the breadcrumbs. We're laying out the breadcrumbs for you to ask the questions, but ultimately it's up to the stakeholders in New York. It's up to the stakeholders in Long Island. It's up to the stakeholders in your county, in your own district. They don't want to hear from me coming from New Jersey. The last thing that anyone wants to hear from in Long Island is from someone from New Jersey. So it's up to you to be the advocates, you know, to make the case and use this data. Because like a good friend of mine who passed away a couple of years ago was a gentleman by the name of Sir Ken Robinson. He worked very closely with me in the early stages of the data project and some of our work in California when he was living out there. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Bob, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And that same is true as it relates to arts education. We've got lots of people in the arts education field that have lots of opinions. We're not lacking for opinions in the arts education sector, but we don't have as much data to back them up. And the whole idea behind the data project is to empower you all and local citizens with the data you need to make a difference so that we can increase access to and participation in arts education programs for all students.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this work that you've done. Thank you for what you've created. This is all free information that's already out there. I remember when I first saw this website, my jaw hit the floor because I was having a conversation not long before that. Somebody saying, we need the data, we need to know, and here it is. So I hope everyone was able to pull some information from this. Please run with it, use it. Let me know if you have any other questions. And I will be sending everything in an email after this, probably later this week. And that's it. So thank you so much again, Dr. Morrison, for being here. And thank you all for joining us today, and more soon from the Alliance.
Thank you all. And again, there's my email if you want to email me about this. So have a great night.
Thank you.